All right, so we just learned in the previous video how to automatically update our app, right? Twice every second, once every second, right? It looks like an animation. That was really cool. Now, here, we're dealing with a more complicated app. We want to slow down Shiny updates. How often Shiny updates? We want to slow it down because it takes more time to compute. It's more complicated app, right? So on the right side, user interface, uh, everything is the same except there is simulate button, right? So our goal again is when, the goal here is to hold off updates until the user clicks this simulate button. In other words, when the user changes lambda 1, lambda 2, or n, the Shiny doesn't update, okay? Only one input, simulate. When that is clicked, Shiny updates. All right. So that is the goal. So on the UI side, everything is the same except we added this action button. Okay. So let's try that. So we go here and we save this as section 5.2, right? And then we are going to add in the left column, right, for inputs, we're going to add action button, right? In action button, you can see that the first argument is input ID and then label and other additional arguments that already has default values. So only two mandatory arguments. So input ID, so let's say simulate, and then the label, label was simulate with uppercase S and exclamation mark, like that, right? Okay, so run app, save selected, and that is what we see here. But it doesn't do anything, it doesn't impact anything because we haven't modified the server function yet. Okay? All right, so let's go back and see here. So two different cases. One is we are going to use regular reactive function, okay, and see what it does. And then we're going to replace reactive function with event reactive, okay? And that way we're going to know, we're going to understand why we use event reactive instead of reactive. One thing that I want you to keep in mind is when you change these inputs, lambda 1, lambda 2, and Shiny shouldn't update. Only when this simulate button is clicked, then the Shiny updates, right? So again, the first case, we're going to use regular reactive function that we have used so far. So x1 and x2, right, is defined by reactive, updates using reactive function, and reactive function uses these inputs, right? Simulate, and then input, and input lambda 1, that's x1, and x2 uses the same input except lambda 2 instead of lambda 1, okay? And then x1, x2, these reactive values are used as inputs for histogram, right? So let's try that. So we already have this server function from the previous case. So in the previous case, the case of animation, we use reactive timer. We don't need that anymore because we're not using the current time as an input. So now here, reactive instead of timer, we're going to use input, and then input ID is a simulate, right? So input ID here was simulate. Okay, so instead of timer, again, the same thing here for x2, input, $, simulate, right? And oops, yep. So that's all there is. So let's run it. There you go. Now see what happens when we change lambda 1. Immediately, Shiny updates. And that's what we want. That's not what we want, right? We want to hold off Shiny updates until this simulate button is clicked, right? It still does it, but we don't want Shiny to update when these other inputs change. All right. So in order to do that, we need to use event reactive instead of regular reactive function. So let's close the app and let's bring up documentation, event reactive. And so you can see observe event has two mandatory arguments here, event expression and then handler expression. So basically, what we need is replace reactive with event reactive, and the first argument is event expression. In other words, what triggers this what triggers execution of this reactive expression, and that is input simulate. Okay, and then so we need to. That's the first argument, and then second argument is this expression handler expression, which is what's the action? That's this random selection function here, right? The same thing here, event reactive instead of reactive, and we want to move this input, because that is the first argument here, right? So that should be it. Let's run it again. So we don't see any output yet because it this simulate button needs to be clicked. There you go. There you go. So now let's see when we change lambda 1 or lambda 2 or n, um, let's see whether Shiny updates immediately after these other inputs change. No updates yet, right? No updates. Now let's click. There you go. Okay, so that this is why we use event reactive instead of the regular reactive function. All right, very good. And I'll see you in the next video.